I should have known better than to confess on a crowded train. But love makes idiots out of us, doesn't it? Especially when the boy you've been chasing for years looks at you like you're just another stranger in the city you both call home. The rejection hit harder than I expected. It wasn't dramatico shouting. No insults, just a quiet, almost embarrassed, "I don't feel the same way." And then the silence that followed, heavier than the screeching brakes of the subway, heavier than the hundreds of strangers pretending not to notice the awkward scene. And yet, in the middle of that humiliation, my eyes caught his. He was leaning casually against the metal pole across from me, a stranger with sharp features, dark hair slightly falling over his brow. His eyes weren't pitying God. No, that would have destroyed me. Instead, they were steady, curious, like he was seeing not just the broken shell of me in that moment but something else, something worth watching. New York is cruel like that. It throws you against walls, spits you out onto sidewalks, and then shans you someone you never saw coming. By the time the train screeched to a halt and my so-called crush bolted out without looking back, I was left there, stranded in my humiliation. And the stranger, well, he was still there, watching. When the crowd thinned, he walked over. "You okay?" His voice was low, a little rough around the edges, the kind of voice you'd expect from a late-night radio DJ who knows all your secrets. I wanted to say yes, to brush it off, to play the unbothered New Yorker. But the truth slipped out before I could stop it. No, not really. He didn't laugh, didn't offer some cliché line about plenty of fish in the sea. Instead, he nodded, as if I'd said the most reasonable thing in the world. And somehow that silence was better than anything else. The night should have ended there. I should have gone home, buried myself in my bed, and pretended the city hadn't just swallowed me whole. But fate, or maybe just bad luck, had other plans. A storm was ripping through Manhattan that night. Flights delayed, trains stalled. My apartment uptown had lost power hours before, and the hotel I stumbled into soaked, miserable, and clinging to the last shred of my dignity was overbooked. That's when I saw him again. The stranger. He was at the counter, arguing with the receptionist, though his voice remained calm, like he'd already had a long night and didn't have the energy for rage. "They double-booked me," he explained when he caught me staring. Apparently, New York hotels can screw you over even when you make a reservation 2 months in advance. I almost laughed. It felt cruelly fitting that the universe would shove us together like this. Minutes later, after the kind of negotiation only desperate travelers can manage, the receptionist offered a single solution. 1 room, 2 beds. The stranger glanced at me, eyes flickering with hesitation, then amusement. "Well," he said, "looks like it's either this or the street." And just like that, I found myself walking into a hotel room with a man whose name I didn't even know. The room wasn't fancy. Beige walls, a faint smell of disinfectant, a window rattling with the storm outside. 2 double beds separated by a nightstand with a lamp that flickered like it couldn't make up its mind whether to work or not. He tossed his bag onto one bed and shrugged off his damp jacket. His shirt clung to him, soaked from the rain, outlining the lean lines of muscle underneath. I tried not to notice. "You take the other bed," he said casually, as if this situation wasn't bizarre at all. I did, quietly dropping my bag and sitting on the edge, trying to process the absurdity of the night. A stranger had witnessed my heartbreak, followed me through the storm, and now we were here. He broke the silence first. "So, what's your name?" "Eli," I said, voice hoarse from everything I'd been holding in. "And yours?" "Caleb." Caleb. Strong, simple, steady. A name that suited the way he carried himself. I nodded, awkwardly pulling at the hem of my damp shirt. "Thanks for, not laughing back there. Wouldn't have been funny," he said matter-of-factly, leaning back against the headboard like he'd lived in hotel rooms his whole life. "Getting your heart kicked around isn't something I joke about." The sincerity in his voice disarmed me. Most people fill silences with empty words, but Caleb seemed comfortable just letting things sit. It was unnerving and comforting all at once. The storm outside howled like it was trying to tear the city apart. Lightning split the sky, thunder shaking the thin glass window. Inside, the air felt different, thick, charged. Caleb shifted, resting his arm across the back of the bed. So, you confessed on a train. That's bold. I groaned, burying my face in my hands. Bold? More like stupid. Depends, he said, lips curving into the faintest smile. I've seen worse. At least you went for it. His calm acceptance of something that felt like the end of my world almost made me laugh. Almost. You don't even know me, I muttered. Not yet, he said. The way he said it so simple, so steady sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't sleep much that night. Between the storm, the echo of rejection replaying in my head, and the quiet presence of Caleb lying just a few feet away, my mind refused to shut down. At some point, I rolled over and caught sight of him. He wasn't asleep either. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, hands folded behind his head. You always this restless? He asked when he caught me staring. Only when my life feels like it's falling apart, I whispered. He turned his head then, meeting my eyes across the small space between our beds. Then maybe it's not falling apart. Maybe it's just starting over. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, and in that small, fragile silence, something shifted. Caleb's words lingered in the air long after they left his lips. Maybe it's not falling apart. Maybe it's just starting over. No one had ever said something like that to me before. People usually offered sympathy, clumsy comfort, or awkward silence. But he had framed my disaster as if it was an opening, not an ending. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But when your heart's still raw, it's hard to think of anything as a beginning. You really think so? I asked, my voice cracking on the last word. Caleb shifted slightly, turning onto his side, facing me across the dark stretch of the hotel room. The storm outside had softened into a steady rain, the kind that whispered against the windows like a lullaby. His silhouette in the dim light seemed impossibly calm, like he belonged in this moment in a way I didn't. I do, he said simply. You were brave. Doesn't matter how it turned out. Most people don't even try. That has to mean something. I let his words sink in, though a bitter part of me still resisted. Brave? I felt like a fool. Still, I found myself holding his gaze longer than I should have. My chest tightened in ways I didn't want to name. Why do you care, anyway? I asked finally. I mean, I'm just some stranger who fell apart in front of you on the subway. Caleb's mouth curved into the faintest smile. Maybe I don't believe in accidents. The way he said it was almost dangerous, like a door cracked open into something I didn't know if I was ready for. I rolled onto my back quickly, staring at the ceiling to avoid the weight of his gaze. You're weird, I muttered. He chuckled softly. Takes one to know one. By morning, the storm had passed, but its mark was everywhere: wet streets, shining sidewalks, the city sparkling under a weak, washed-out sunrise. I woke to the sound of running water. Caleb was in the shower, the bathroom door half closed, steam curling out into the room. My throat went dry at the thought of him behind that door, bare, water sliding over skin I'd only caught glimpses of through his damp clothes the night before. I shoved the thought away, sitting up quickly, my face burning. What was wrong with me? He was a stranger. I didn't even know what he did for a living, or what his last name was. And yet, the shower shut off, and moments later, Caleb stepped out, towel slung low around his waist, another rubbing at his wet hair. His chest was lean but defined, droplets of water still clinging to his skin. Bathroom's free, he said casually, as though he hadn't just walked out like a living daydream. I swallowed hard. Thanks. I darted into the bathroom before my thoughts could betray me further, shutting the door and pressing my back against it. I thought my heartbreak would be the most complicated thing in my life this week. I hadn't accounted for Caleb. Later, as we checked out, I realized I didn't want this to be the end. We walked out into the cool morning air together, the city alive with its usual chaos horns blaring, people shouting, vendors setting up for the day. Caleb adjusted the strap of his bag and turned to me. So, where are you headed? I hesitated. Back uptown. You? Brooklyn, he said. Got a meeting this afternoon. Something about the way he said it told me he wasn't in any rush to leave. Look, he added, rubbing the back of his neck. I know this is weird, but if you ever want to grab coffee, I'm around. Here. He handed me a small, battered notebook and a pen. I blinked at him, confused, until he tilted his head toward it. Number. Write it down. I laughed, more out of nerves than anything else. You're awfully confident for a guy who barely knows me. I know enough, he said. Something about that made my stomach flip. I scribbled my number down, tore the page out, and handed it to him. His fingers brushed mine warm, steady, and I felt it all the way to my chest. See you around, Eli, he said, slipping the paper into his pocket. And then he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. I didn't expect him to call. New York was a city built on fleeting encounters, after all. People pass through your life like shadows, sometimes touching you, sometimes not, always moving. But that night, my phone buzzed. Coffee tomorrow? 10 a.m. Caleb. I stared at the screen far longer than necessary, my heart pounding. Against every shred of logic, against every voice in my head telling me this was insane, I typed back. Yes. The cafe was small, tucked into a quiet street in the West Village. The kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and old books, with chipped mugs and overstuffed armchairs. Caleb was already there when I arrived, leaning back in his seat, coffee in hand, like he had all the time in the world. You came, he said, his lips tugging upward. Yeah, well, free coffee's hard to turn down. I joked, though my pulse betrayed me. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me he worked in architecture, designing buildings that would outlast both of us. I told him about my job at a publishing house, about my desperate dream of writing something that mattered. He listened, really listened. Not the kind of half-hearted nodding people do while checking their phones, but with eyes locked on mine, questions that dug deeper, silences that felt safe instead of awkward. At one point, when I mentioned how my father still didn't know I was gay, his expression softened. That's tough, he said quietly. Family can be complicated. You? I asked. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since I met him, he looked away. Let's just say, mine isn't exactly supportive either. There was something raw in his voice, something he didn't elaborate on, and I didn't push. But in that moment, I felt an unspoken thread weaving between us. We were both carrying pieces of ourselves we didn't always know how to share. And yet, somehow, it felt like maybe we could carry them together. After coffee, he walked me to the subway, the city buzzing around us. At the top of the stairs, we lingered, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. So, Caleb said, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes glinting with something I couldn't name. Can I see you again? I should have hesitated. I should have thought about the fact that this was fast, reckless even. But instead, I heard myself say, yeah, I'd like that. His smile small, genuine. A little crooked was enough to warm me through the chill of the city air. And as I descended the subway stairs, my heart hammering, I realized something terrifying. I was already falling. The following week, we saw each other again. And again. Dinner in Brooklyn. A late-night walk through Central Park. A movie where we barely paid attention to the screen, too busy stealing glances at each other in the flickering light. Each time, the space between us grew smaller. And yet, there was a tension, a line neither of us had crossed. His hand would brush mine, linger for a heartbeat, then retreat. His eyes would drop to my lips, only to snap back to mine as if catching himself. It was maddening. One night, as we walked along the Brooklyn Bridge, the city glowing behind us, I couldn't take it anymore. Caleb, I said, stopping in my tracks. He turned, brow furrowed. Yeah, what are we doing? For a second, he looked startled. Then his gaze softened, and he stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool night air. I don't know, he admitted, but I know I don't want it to stop. And before I could second-guess myself, before fear could drag me back, I closed the space between us and kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, messy, the kind of kiss that comes after weeks of holding back something too heavy to contain. His hands found my face, mine clutched at his shirt, and the city spun around us like it knew we had just broken some invisible barrier. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, his forehead rested against mine. "Eli," he whispered, my name like a prayer on his lips. "God, you drive me insane." I laughed, choked and shaky, my chest aching in the best way possible. "Takes one to know one." His smile was brighter than the skyline behind him. And in that moment, for the first time since that humiliating night on the train, I felt Ithope. Real, terrifying, unstoppable hope. Kissing him on the Brooklyn Bridge should have felt like the climax of some teenage fantasy, the kind of reckless romance you read about but never live. Instead, it felt terrifyingly real. His lips were warm, his hands grounding me, and the sound of the city below us roared like it was cheering us on. But when we pulled back, the look in Caleb's eyes wasn't just hunger or heat. There was something else there, something I couldn't name. It wasn't hesitation, not exactly. It was more like he was holding a piece of himself back, guarding it, as if no matter how close I got, there was a door he wouldn't let me through. I didn't ask about it. Not that night. I was too afraid of shattering whatever fragile thing we had just begun to build. Instead, we walked the rest of the bridge in silence, our fingers brushing, until finally, his hand found mine. And this time, he didn't let go. We began to see each other regularly after that. Dinner dates turned into lazy afternoons in bookstores. Long walks turned into movie nights at my apartment. It was easy with him, easier than it had any right to be. He had this way of steadying me, of making my scattered thoughts feel less chaotic. Around him, I didn't feel like the desperate fool who'd humiliated himself on a subway. I felt like me. One evening, after a dinner of greasy Chinese takeout and half-watched reruns on TV, he fell asleep on my couch. His head tilted against my shoulder, breath soft and even. I should have moved, should have eased him into a more comfortable position, but I couldn't. My chest ached with something too big to hold, something I wasn't sure I was ready to admit out loud. Love. The word terrified me, and yet, sitting there with Caleb's weight warm against me, it felt inevitable. But good things in my life never stayed simple for long. The first crack came in the form of a phone call. I was at work, sorting through manuscripts, when my phone buzzed. Caleb's name lit up the screen. My chest tightened with excitement as I picked up. "Hey," I said, maybe too eagerly, but his voice on the other end wasn't the Caleb I knew. It was clipped, cold. "I can't see you tonight," he said. "Oh, that's okay. Tomorrow then." "No," he said sharply. Then softer, almost strained. I need some space, Eli. Don't call me for a while." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart sinking like a stone. Space. The word echoed in my head, ripping through the fragile safety we'd built. For 3 days, I didn't hear from him. Each morning I woke hoping for a message. Each night I went to sleep with the weight of silence pressing on my chest. My mind spiraled through every possibility. Had I pushed too fast? Did the kiss mean more to me than to him? Was I just a distraction, a rebound, a fleeting moment in his life that didn't matter? By the 4th day, I couldn't take it anymore. I called him, straight to voicemail. So I did the one thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. I went to his apartment. It wasn't stalking, not really. He'd told me where he lived weeks ago, when we joked about his neighborhood being the hipster capital of Brooklyn. I told myself I just wanted to make sure he was okay. But when I got there, the sight that greeted me nearly knocked the air from my lungs. Caleb was outside his building, standing on the sidewalk, arguing with a man I didn't recognize. The man was older, maybe in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that looked wildly out of place in this part of the city. And Caleb looked furious. "You don't get to just show up here," he snapped. The man's voice was calm, patronizing. "I'm still your father, Caleb. You can't keep ignoring me forever." Father. The word slammed into me. I froze, my instinct screaming at me to leave, to give him privacy. but my feet wouldn't move. I told you, Caleb said through clenched teeth. You lost that right a long time ago. You don't get to walk back into my life now like nothing happened. The man sighed, glancing around as though embarrassed by the public scene. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Come home. We can talk. We can fix this. Caleb laughed, but it was sharp, bitter. Fix this? You mean pretend I'm someone I'm not? Pretend your perfect little son didn't ruin your reputation by being gay. My heart stopped. The man's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. No, Caleb said, stepping closer, his voice low but deadly steady. You don't get to silence me anymore. You wanted a son who fit into your world. That's not me. It never will be. And with that, he turned and stormed inside, leaving the man standing there, seething. I ducked behind the corner before his father could spot me, my chest tight, my mind reeling. So that was it. That was the piece of himself Caleb had been guarding. The door he hadn't let me through. His family. His pain. And suddenly, his retreat, his silence, his need for space, it all made sense. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, torn between wanting to run to him and knowing he might push me away if I did. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and typed out a message. I don't know what's going on, but I'm here. Whatever it is, you don't have to go through it alone. I hesitated before hitting send, my thumb hovering over the button. What if it scared him off? What if I was crossing a line? But then I thought of his face, the raw anger, the hurt carved into his features as he faced his father. And I hit send. Hours passed. No response. I tried to bury myself in work, but every buzz of my phone sent my heart lurching. Nothing. It wasn't until late evening, as I was leaving the office, that my phone finally rang. Caleb. I answered instantly. Caleb, can you come over? His voice was quiet, rough, like he'd been holding back tears all day. My chest tightened. Of course. When I arrived at his apartment, he looked shattered. His usually steady posture was slumped, his eyes rimmed red, his hair a mess like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. Without a word, he pulled me inside and shut the door. For a moment, we just stood there, the silence heavy. Then, slowly, he spoke. I didn't want you to see that, he said hoarsely. I didn't want you to know. I shook my head. Caleb, my father. He cut in, his voice trembling. He's a powerful man, rich, respected. And for as long as I can remember, I was supposed to be his legacy. Perfect grades, perfect career, perfect image. But when I came out, I ruined everything. At least that's how he saw it. He swallowed hard, his eyes dropping to the floor. He cut me off, told me I was a disgrace. I've spent years trying to build my life without him, but he won't stop showing up. Won't stop trying to drag me back. I stepped closer, my heart breaking with every word. Caleb, his voice cracked. I didn't want you to see me like that. Weak, broken. My hands shook as I reached for him, cupping his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. You're not weak, I whispered fiercely. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived him. You built yourself without him. That doesn't make you broken. That makes you extraordinary. His eyes glistened, his breath shuddering. And then he kissed me. This kiss was different from the first. Less desperate, more desperate all at once. It was a plea, a confession, a surrender. His hands clutched at me like he was afraid I'd disappear, like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. We stumbled backward, crashing onto the couch, laughter breaking through the tears as his weight pressed into me. His lips moved hungrily against mine, his hands tangling in my hair, mine gripping his shirt like I could anchor him there forever. For the first time, I felt him let go, really let go. And as the city lights flickered outside his window, as his breath mingled with mine, I knew there was no turning back. I was his, and maybe, just maybe, he was mine. The night Caleb finally let me see his scars changed everything. After his father's sudden reappearance, after the storm of anger and pain that cracked open in front of me, I thought maybe, just maybe, he would push me away for good. but instead he let me in. The weeks that followed were both beautiful and brutal. We learned each other's rhythms, the way he liked his coffee black and I needed mine drowned in sugar, the way he hummed absent-mindedly when he sketched designs for buildings, the way I read aloud when editing manuscripts because hearing the words helped me feel them better. We also learned each other's fears. He had nights where he jolted awake from nightmares of his father's voice, sharp and condemning. I had mornings where I woke in a cold sweat, terrified this was too fragile, that he would realize I wasn't worth the risk. But somehow, even in the mess, we held on. Until his father came back. It happened on a crisp Sunday afternoon in Central Park. We were walking, hand brushing hand, but not quite holding, still cautious about being too visible in a city that could be cruel. Caleb looked lighter than he had in weeks, sunlight catching the edge of his smile. Then a voice cut through the air. "Caleb." We both froze. His father stood on the path ahead, immaculate in another tailored suit, as though he'd stepped out of a boardroom and into our fragile peace. His eyes flicked from Caleb to me, narrowing slightly, like he had found exactly what he was looking for. "Who's this?" he asked, though the disdain in his tone made it clear he already knew. Caleb stiffened beside me. "This is Eli, and he's none of your business." His father's mouth tightened. "You're making a spectacle of yourself. Parading around with—" "Stop," Caleb snapped, his voice shaking with fury. "You don't get to talk about him like that. You don't get to talk to me like that. Not anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. People passed us, eyes flicking curiously, but no one stopped. Finally, his father said coldly, "You'll regret this." And then he turned, walking away without another glance. I stood there, heart racing, unsure whether to reach for Caleb or give him space. His fists were clenched, his jaw tight, but his eyes were blazing with something fierce. He turned to me. "I'm done letting him control me. I'm done." And then, right there in the middle of the park, he took my hand. Firm, unshaken, in full view of the world. I squeezed back, my throat tight. Good, because I'm not going anywhere. It should have been the turning point, the moment where everything got easier. But love isn't a straight line, and neither is healing. Caleb struggled, sometimes retreating into himself, sometimes pushing me away when the weight of his past felt too heavy. I struggled too, terrified I wasn't enough to hold him together, terrified I would fail him the way his father had. One night, after a brutal fight where he told me he didn't need saving and I snapped back that I wasn't trying to save him, I stormed out of his apartment. The city was cold, biting, but the storm inside me was worse. Was this love? Was it supposed to hurt this much? I walked aimlessly for hours, my chest aching, until my phone buzzed. A message. "Eli, please come back. I don't want to fight. I just don't know how to do this. But I want to. With you." I stopped in the middle of the street, tears stinging my eyes, and I turned around. When I got back, he was sitting on the floor of his living room, his back against the couch, his face buried in his hands. I dropped to the floor beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered, "I'm scared." "Of what?" I asked gently. "Of losing you. Of not being enough for you. Of being me." My chest cracked open. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. "Caleb, you're enough. You've always been enough. And you're not going to lose me. Not unless you push me so far away I can't find my way back. But even then, I'll try." He looked at me then, eyes wet, and for the first time I saw him truly vulnerable, not as the strong, steady stranger who had comforted me on a train, but as a man stripped raw, terrified of love and needing it all the same. And I loved him all the more for it. Time didn't fix everything, but it softened the edges. His father's shadow still loomed, but Caleb no longer let it define him. Slowly, he built new boundaries, new strength, and I stood beside him, learning how to love without losing myself in the process. Months later, on a quiet evening in his apartment, he handed me a small notebook. The same one he had used the night we met, when he asked for my number. "Open it," he said. Inside were sketches of buildings. Beautiful, intricate designs. But woven into the margins, into the details of the architecture, were words. My words. Lines from conversations we'd had. Things I'd said without thinking, scribbled down in his messy handwriting. My breath caught. You kept these? He nodded, his lips curving into a soft smile. You inspire me. You make me see things differently. And I wanted you to know that you're part of everything I build now. Tears blurred my vision. I laughed shakily. Caleb, that's the most ridiculous, romantic thing anyone's ever done for me. Good, he said, leaning closer. Because I'm in love with you. The words hit me like a train, like lightning, like every storm we'd ever weathered together. I laughed, half sobbing, throwing my arms around him. God, I love you too. And when he kissed me then, it wasn't desperate or broken. It was whole, steady, certain. The stranger who had once watched me fall apart on a subway was no longer a stranger. He was my anchor, my chaos, my beginning. And though the city would always be loud, messy, unforgiving, I knew now that in all that noise, we had carved out something quiet, something ours. Love. Messy, imperfect, stubborn love. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.